everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I think we can start. Probably more people will keep going, but let's kick off. Welcome on behalf of the Martin Center. I am strategic coordinator and research officer at the Martin Center for European Studies, but I think I can also welcome them on behalf of the Foundation for Civic Hungary, which is our partner organization specifically responsible for this panel under the umbrella of the Net at Work, which, as you know, is organized by the by the Martin Center itself. So I think you saw the topic of the panel. It's post-Brexit future of the EU project. What we plan to do is to start with a brief kickoff by Peter Kleppe, which I will introduce in a moment, who will give us a bit of context about the causes of Brexit and about some lessons that this may teach us in the future of Europe debate that we are having. And then we will have a plenary exchange on the panel, but hopefully pretty early I'll try to open the floor to you for questions. So please feel encouraged to raise points, to intervene, to participate. As a way of introduction, I should say that what is the link between the Brexit issue and the future of Europe debate? If you think closely, I think the link is quite intimate. In a way, the future of Europe debate is the result of several developments, but Brexit is probably the most shocking development of all. We had felt since the election of 2014, all pro-European political forces had felt that something had changed in the atmosphere, you know, in the feeling on the ground about European integration. There was a clear rise of Eurosceptic forces, which was evident in the result of the 2014 election. But Brexit in June 2016 was a shocking manifestation of a rejection of European integration in one of the most important countries. Member since 1973, the biggest military power and nuclear power in Europe, one of the biggest economies. So it was a shocking day. And I probably would say that we went through three phases. Our reactions have happened in three phases. The first reaction was, I think, for most people in Brussels, shock and incredulity. I don't know how many of you were around the day after the referendum result. We just couldn't believe it. We just couldn't believe that they had voted that way. And many of us, not me personally, but many of us felt almost insulted that they could reject European integration so strongly. But then after the summer break, there was a change in tone, a change in narrative. I remember many senior, even EPP people, saying, okay, I mean, it's bad, we are losing a big player, but overall, why not being cautiously optimistic? There are many areas of integration which had been blocked by Britain. Defense was one of them. The regulation of financial transactions was another one. Tax coordination was a third one. So many were saying, these also give us a chance to move on many areas. And then there was a third change of attitude after some months in early 2017, if you remember, because of course in November Trump was elected in the United States. Then we started seeing polls, dangerous polls from the Netherlands and to some extent France that seemed to signal the rise of populist Eurosceptic parties there. And I think we got to the mood which is still predominant now, which is a mood of self-questioning. All the pro-European forces somehow wonder what went wrong, what can be changed, how can we kickstart again the European integration project maybe on a new basis. The main effort there was the Commission's idea of discussing the future of Europe, the famous white paper published in March 2017. And 1 year on, that's where we are. We are still having this discussion in a very changed, of course, political context with a new French president, which is very EU enthusiastic, I would say. And so this is the framework. I would say that I will give the floor to Peter after briefly introducing him. So Peter Kleppe is the head of the Brussels office of Open Europe, which is noted British think tank. I think before the referendum you were mostly working on EU reform. After the referendum you shifted towards Brexit and the future relationship between the UK and the European Union. He is a Belgian by nationality, so he's not British. He's a trained lawyer. He was an advisor for a Belgian state secretary, I believe, before joining Open Europe, and he's everywhere as a commentator on migration, on EU reform, on the euro. So, Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Federico, and good morning, everyone. The first thing I'd like to do is to explain why Brexit was not something that resulted from the inner mechanics of the UK Conservative Party, because many analysts claim that, and I can give you some dates and some facts that happened preceding Brexit to back this up. In 2004, Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, promised a referendum on the European Constitution. That was Labour. Rejected in France and Netherlands in 25, repackaged as the Lisbon Treaty in 2007. Now, 1 year later, Nick Clegg, the leader of the Lib Dems, promised a referendum on that Lisbon Treaty. Now, that Lisbon Treaty was rejected by Ireland in 2008, and then in 2009 they voted again, voted the right way, for it to then go into force. David Cameron was then very happy. He didn't have to block it, I think. But the issue remained. The power and the strength of UKIP was only one of the factors that drove David Cameron to then promise a referendum on the actual membership in 2013. In 2015, 544 out of 597 members of British Parliament voted to support this idea to hold a referendum. And then in 2016, the majority, more than 17 million people in the UK, voted to leave the European Union. Last year, 2017, 498 out of 612 members of parliament in the UK Parliament voted to activate Article 50. So I think that should be proof enough that this was not the result of some inner discontent in the fringes of the Conservative Party, which it has been presented by many experts who were very much in favor of ever more powers being transferred to the European level, which were therefore biased, which therefore had an incentive to play this down. We had I think, a problem that fundamentally Britain was never at ease with the with EU membership, and this worsened over the years, partly due to basically the fact that Britain was ignored, that its idea that the EU should be more something like a trade arrangement was not being implemented. The UK had failed to convince the other member states out of that. Now, I do think sort of fundamentally the sentiment that you have in Britain is also present in many other member states, but to a lesser degree. If you look at the history of the last 20, 30 years, we had France and Denmark voting on the Maastricht Treaty. Denmark rejected it and then got this opt-out. France only narrowly supported the Maastricht Treaty, we forget that. So this was not a project that was, let's say, received in a widely enthusiastic ways by France. I would argue that the euro, the common currency, because of its dynamic to increase debt and then contribute to investment bubbles, then contribute to bailouts, is actually damaging the EU's popularity and the EU project. What you see is that this leads to transfers being decided. They say it's emergency loans that are being given to countries in need, but emergency loans with artificially low interest rates. So economically, that's a transfer, and the people in the countries that have to pay for these transfers don't like this. But then the people who in the countries who are receiving the transfers, they don't like the conditions linked to the transfer. So this kind of large-scale transfers also through the European Central Bank, I think, damaged the EU sentiment, nobody is happy in the end. We can see indeed how a number of referendums have been ignored. How recently, or in the last 15 years, almost every referendum on EU issues went against the European Union. Ireland in 2001, France and the Netherlands in 2005, Ireland in 2008, Denmark and Greece in 2015. We haven't seen a proper response to that. The response has always been, let's go for it, business as usual. And even now, you could say the Macron agenda can be summarized as more power and money to the central EU level. Now, there are very good arguments for that and against that, but I would argue it's clearly going against the trends that we've seen in the general public. Attempts to reform the EU have failed. Even the most high-profile attempt of David Cameron threatening with a referendum on membership, he came back with some relatively minimal reforms. EU leaders were not willing to deliver, let's say, reforms that would decentralize power in a material way back to the member states. Now, people always say, look, you want reform of the EU. What exactly do you want? And that's a very fair question. But I think if you look at the political debate, most people are not against the European Union. And if you look at when people are annoyed about the European Union, then you can see they are not happy when transfers are being organized, either because they have to pay for it or there are conditions linked to it. They're also not happy when let's say, sensitive issues that are closely interrelated to national democracy are being touched by the EU level. I'm talking, of course, about then migration, sensitive choices about migration. This is sensitive in every country. I'm talking about budget supervision, generally excessive regulation coming from the EU level. Even the European Commission, with the fact that Mr. Timmermans is responsible for that, has admitted that there is too much EU regulation, that they have gone too far. So typically, every time people complain about the EU, it's always about that. But I hardly ever hear anyone complaining about the fact that Ryanair is allowed to provide its services to consumers. I don't hear anyone in Spain saying, "Oh, what a scandal that Ryanair and all these low-cost carriers can offer their services. Shouldn't we not reinstate the monopoly for our national carrier?" You don't hear people saying that. I'm pretty convinced that if the EU would put more capital in opening up the services market, in making it easier for people to buy a car in another country, I'm pretty confident that this is what citizens, this is the part of European integration that citizens really support. And if it would lead to some clash between the Commission and a member state, I think the Commission could well win that. In a nutshell, to conclude, if the European Union wants to become more popular again, because I think nobody wants to see this project end, then it needs to simply focus on what is popular. And its core business, opening up barriers to trade, is still popular. Of course, there are some criticism on that here and there, but not to the extent of the criticism that you hear when the EU goes into areas of national sovereignty. So I'll leave it here, and I'll happily discuss this further in the Q&A.
Thanks, Peter. If I may, I will restate two of your points, which I think are fair points, and maybe contest another two of your points, which in my opinion are less fair. I think you're absolutely right that there were structural issues in motivating Brexit, some long-term structural issues for which Britain had always been uneasy with, especially with the political aspects of European integration. I think you're absolutely right that there was a mistake in ignoring signal of dissatisfaction from citizens towards European integration in all these referenda that you mentioned. I'm not entirely sure that Britain was ignored, to be frank. I mean, a country that had an opt-out on Schengen, an opt-out on the euro, an opt-out on the social protocol after Maastricht is not precisely a country that was ignored. Cameron's renegotiation was not ignored. He got something out of this renegotiation. Then the British people thought, rightly or wrongly, that it was not sufficient. The second point is that there is, however, I think, I will give you the chance to say something about it, but there is some internal Conservative Party dynamics that motivated it. Cameron pledged to hold a referendum to win over the Eurosceptic wing of his own party in the 2006 contest for the party membership. There was the UKIP issue, so this played a role, I think. So later, when you come in, you feel free to comment on this as well, but I will introduce the other panelists, and they will also have the chance to react to the kickoff. So I think I can start from my far left with Istvan Poca. Poca, sorry, I will mispronounce, horrendously mispronounce many Hungarian names in the next 2 minutes. I hope so. So you are a foreign policy expert primarily, but I gather an expert of German politics. So maybe I will ask you something about that. You are now at the Civic Foundation, which is a conservative foundation close to Fidesz, the ruling party. We have, to my immediate left, Csaba Fodor. He is now, I think, the executive director of the Nézőpont Institute, a conservative think tank close to Fidesz. Too, he has worked as a political analyst since 2011. I gather you mostly focused on internal Hungarian politics and Visegrad 4 issues. You conducted polling on across the 4 countries belonging to the Visegrad group. And I have here to my immediate right Istvan Kish.
Yes.
This I got it right. Who is also a foreign policy expert at the Civic Foundation. And you focus on the Commonwealth. You are doing a PhD, I think, on the Commonwealth and British politics. Yes. So you're quite competent. Feel free to comment on the Brexit issue as well. So I will give each of you, and maybe we can start from Istvan, some time to react to the kickoff and to present your own perspective. Not only, I think we should start introducing also the second part of the debate, not only Brexit, but also the broad future of Europe debate.
Okay, I will try. Thank you very much, Federico. And I would also like to thank Martin Center and our partner, Foundation for Civic Hungary, for organizing this panel and inviting me. It's a great honor to be here in front of you. Would also like to thank the audience to showing up and showing interest in our small panel. So first a bit about Brexit. In my opinion, if you talk about Brexit, it's really important to talk about sovereignty, and especially the concept of parliamentary sovereignty, which is a huge historical concept in the United Kingdom's political system. And basically this means that the British Parliament is an institution which should do every decision in the Great Britain, because it is basically the embodiment of the people's will. And if you look at the UK, when and especially Brexit, when all people, especially conservative people, felt that this concept of sovereignty, parliamentary sovereignty, is threatened because of EU law, because of migration policy, and it's also important to think. And when Brexit itself happened, we had this huge migration crisis. And I think this whole migration crisis didn't really help this whole referendum, because I think a lot of people were threatened in Britain that this will mean that they will have to accept a lot of refugees coming from all over the world, and even if they don't want to accept these refugees, so the ending decision wouldn't be with the British Parliament but with the European Union. We can debate that, of course, wasn't the issue, but a lot of people still felt that this was the problem. So I think we should really think about this whole idea of sovereignty. And if you're talking about the future of Europe, then I think a lot of countries still would like to preserve some of their sovereignty. And I think Britain is an extreme case because of this whole historical context of sovereignty. But also in Eastern Europe, where we are coming from, we had communism, we had the Russian occupation. So for us, sovereignty has a completely different meaning. For us, the whole independence of our countries is basically a new phenomenon, and that's why perhaps we have a more unique viewpoint towards sovereignty, and that's why perhaps we are a bit more threatened sometimes of EU regulation, for example. But also to talk a bit about Brexit and perhaps also go around towards the future of Europe, I think a big problem was communication as well. If we look at the Brexit debate and the Brexit referendum, then I think the pro-European forces were not really that competent in their communication. So the parties couldn't really agree in UK, so it was a problem with the UK parties as well. So the Labour Party and the Conservative Party were divided. That was a huge issue, but I don't think that Europe itself, the European Union itself, was really on top of their game. I think the communication was really not there. We had this kind of an assumption or idea that people would be crazy to vote for leaving the European Union. This is just a great thing. So we didn't really focus on showing the British people that why is it really good to be in the European Union, why should they stay in the European Union. So I think if we think about the future of Europe, we should really focus more on communication, how we can show our ideas, and also why the European Union is a great thing to the common people of the European Union, to the common citizens. And I think this is a big problem, this whole communication issue. So I don't want really to take up all the time, but perhaps we can talk about this communication issue a bit more. But shortly, that was my opinion about Brexit.
Thanks a lot, Istvan. Maybe 2 points, and you feel free to react on them, but you say parliamentary sovereignty is threatened within the EU, and yet pooling sovereignty, sharing sovereignty at the European level is the essence of European integration. Without sharing of sovereignty, there is no European integration. So it seems like an innocent statement, but it attacks the core of European integration. So you need to be aware of it. And on the second point, on migration and the UK referendum, it was mostly free movement that was the issue in the UK referendum. It was not migration as such. It was free movement from countries of Central and Eastern Europe, many of which were Hungarians and Poles. So let's be careful. Here we are talking about the fundamental EU freedoms and not migration as such. Please.
Can I react now?
Yes, and I have a follow-up question to you. You say we need to explain to people why the EU is great. Explain it to people. Why is the EU great?
Oh, yes, thank you. I'm not a communication expert, so I don't really know how to explain to the people. But for example, in Hungary, of course, we got a lot of EU funds which are helping the economy. I mean, we could talk more about that, how EU funds are helping the Hungarian economy, but not just that, the whole idea of freedom of movement for countries under communism who couldn't really go to other countries, not even sometimes to other communist countries, but especially not to Western European countries. This is just a huge thing. For my generation, we can freely go to Europe. For example, now we just boarded the plane yesterday. There was no passport check, nothing, and we landed here in Brussels, and everything was fine. Like 20 years ago, we had to queue near the Austrian border for like 2 hours, and we couldn't, and still it wasn't sure if we could enter the European Union. So we should focus more on these perhaps smaller issues as well. It's just a few ideas, perhaps. And going back to parliamentary sovereignty, I think it was, as I said, it's for the British, it's more sensitive than for us. And we can talk more about that this whole pooling of sovereignty could be good in some areas, but perhaps on some areas which are more sensitive to the member countries, we should think more about this pooling of sovereignty. And we can talk about these areas which we think that might be important. I think a common army could be this one, or a common border policy could be a policy like this, where pooling of sovereignty could work. And also about migration, I'm not sure if I agree with you, because I think the whole freedom of movement and people coming outside of Europe, refugees and migrants, have been confused during the referendum. So if you look at a lot of polls in the UK, then most of the British people will say that they don't have a problem with Hungarians or Poles working in the health sector as nurses or doctors. They don't have a problem with Polish plumbers. So if you ask them directly if they have a problem with Eastern European people working there, they will say that not really, because there's a concept that these people are working and they are contributing to the economy, and they are doing work which sometimes British people will not do, and also which are perhaps works which they don't have enough people. For example, in the health sector, they don't have enough people to work there in Great Britain. So I think in the referendum, these two different peoples, Europeans, European member state citizens who were going during free movement, and also people coming outside Europe, were a bit washed together. And I think that people were not really informed on what they are choosing. If you look at all these videos which came out after Brexit, you can see a lot of funny videos of people not really knowing. I mean, they voted for Brexit because they don't want to watch European football and funny things like that. But still, I think there was, because of this whole communication issue, which I said in the beginning, a lot of things were washed together, and it wasn't really an informed decision because of this.
You made, in the second intervention, I think you made a very important point when you said that pooling of sovereignty in some areas is the key issue. So it's not pooling of sovereignty in itself that is a problem. That is the essence of European integration. We need to decide what areas go to the European level, in what areas we share sovereignty, and in what areas we defend national prerogative and parliamentary sovereignty, as you say. And I'll come back to that later. But I would now give the floor to Csaba for his introductory remarks.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. I try to make or give a short answer on this Brexit issue, kurz und gut. Well, I think we have to speak about many challenges. I wouldn't say crisis, because I believe that the nation states and the EU itself will be able to manage all these challenges we had to face in the past few years. Brexit is just one element, but the war in Ukraine, the uncertainties considering energy supplies, irregular migration or terrorism, terrorist threat, these were also very important challenges. And it is very important because István was speak about the link between migration and the Brexit decision. And this is a fact that, for example, voter turnout was higher in those areas, in those regions in Britain where migration is a very important issue. Actually, the Brexit decision is not good at all. We, as the EU, must recognize that we found itself in a competitive disadvantage compared to the Asian and North American regions, and as the UK accounts for a seventh of the EU's economic performance, the contraction of the integrated market does not promise much good either. But, you know, as I told you, I believe that it won't lead us to a deep crisis. It's a challenge, and I believe that the EU itself and the nation states will be able to handle this situation. And as I told you, I was not very happy about this decision, considering that the Hungarian government is going to lose a great ally in the European level. It's also very important, and of course the Hungarian peoples were unhappy about the Brexit decision. We conducted a polling research after the Brexit referendum. it was a nationwide research in Hungary, and it showed that 6 in 10 people were unhappy or were not satisfied with the decision of the Brits. And it was also very interesting that over the share of those who were unhappy or dissatisfied with this decision was over 60% in each party's supporters camp. It's very interesting. All in all, I wasn't very happy about the decision, and as I told you, Hungarians were also dissatisfied with the situation.
Thanks a lot. Maybe one follow-up question, very briefly, on migration. If I understand you correctly, you believe that the problem should be primarily solved at the national level.
The migration
issue. But maybe you can elaborate on that. And I come back to the thing that we were discussing before, like this pooling sovereignty in some areas, maintaining national freedom on other areas. One of the areas that many people believe in Brussels would require stronger European competencies. What sort of competencies we need to discuss is migration. What do you think about that?
Well, actually, we have a very strict opinion on migration, and not just Hungarians, but maybe I should speak about our research experience more, because we conducted a multi-country research project during the last year. It was actually we had 3 international research projects last year. Once was focused on the V4. It was supported by the International Visegrad Fund. And we also conducted a Central European poll in Germany, Austria, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Romania, and Bulgaria, 11 countries. And we found that even the Germans and the Austrians are not very satisfied with the situation. I mean, the migration situation. In Hungary, 64% said that irregular migration poses a threat to the EU, but this share was 42% in Germany, 58% in the Czech Republic, 53% in Slovakia, 46% in Poland, and 64% in Bulgaria. We had another question about the immigration from outside the continent in general. And we found that 8 in 10 people in this region, in Central Europe, I told you the countries said that it's not an advantage. I mean, the immigration from outside the continent. So, yeah, according to these numbers, we believe that the immigration policy should be in a national level, of course. Because these citizens experienced that the EU was not able to handle the migration challenge.
Okay, thanks. I think we can move now to Istvan, please.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you your invitation and to organizing this very interesting and inspiring event. It is a great honor to be here. I would like next speaking about Brexit, because Mr. Kish is our Brexit expert. It is in his blood, and he is a very good Brexit expert. However, I would like to say some words about the post-Brexit future of the European Union. If we want thinking the future of the European Union and find a third way, first of all, we have to know what people think about Europe, and what people think about the future of the European Union. we all want a union which is for the citizens, and that's why we have to ask the European citizens and understand what they think about it and what kind of the European Union they want in the future. In many countries, there is a widespread misperception. Many EU specialized analysts think that and say that people don't understand how EU works. People don't understand the contemporary structure of the European Union, and people don't have opinion about the EU and don't have opinion about the future of the EU. In my view, it's not true. The European people understand the EU and have opinion about the EU, and they have opinion about the future of the European Union. Our think tank, the Civic Foundation, conducts an annual statistical survey in each of the EU member states. The survey's aim is to highlight the challenges that Europe faces. The future of the EU may still be impossible to predict. It's a very difficult question. But this supplement at least gives us much better idea what European people themselves think about Europe, the future of Europe. Naturally, I will speak about our research in the next round, but just one data or just two data from our questions. The debate about the future of the European Union became increasingly important because close to half of the respondents believes that the leaving of the United Kingdom weakens the European Union. It's very easy and we can understand this. But there is another question. It is more important, I think. One of our questions was that in your view, will the European Union still exist in 10 years? The majority of the European citizens, 58%, said yes. However, 30% said no, the EU will not exist in years. I think this will be a very difficult debate about the future, but the first and the most important thing is that what people think about Europe, what people think about the future of the EU. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. One follow-up question, very similar to the question I have already raised, and then maybe I will give Peter the chance to say something about it, and I will open the floor immediately for questions. So please start thinking what you would like to, the points that you would like to raise. We are the European People's Party, okay? All of us, except maybe Peter, his affiliation is dubious, but all of us are the European People's Party. So we have a certain history, we have a certain vision of political union in Europe, which we are not going to abandon. This is quite clear. So the issue is to agree on what exact content this vision of political union requires now. And some of the things that have been said are interesting. The single market, I entirely agree with Peter, EU funds, free movement, basically the four freedoms is a core aspect of that vision, but it's not enough. We need some politics in it. And you mentioned something that is interesting, defense, a common European army. But I would like to hear from our Hungarian friends, what are the areas in which you as individuals and Hungary as a country would be ready to accept stronger European political integration? Bearing in mind that what we said at the beginning is correct. We need pooling of sovereignty in a limited number of areas and respect of national sovereignty in all other areas. But what are these areas where we need pooling of sovereignty? So I will start with you and maybe go this way and finish with Peter, and then we open to you.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, in the debate about the future of the EU, there are two main standpoints. These two standpoints crucially influence what people think and what politicians and what we analysts think about the future of the European community. The first one says the member states should have greater control over the EU. And the second is just the opposite. The EU should have greater power over its member states. Most member states are in favor to strengthening national sovereignty. It conducts research, while only 8 countries have a relative majority who favor stronger European integration. Our research pointed out the fact most Europeans believe that member states should have greater power over the EU. It's worth noting that the citizens of the so-called core countries, for instance, Germany, France, and Italy, are on the same opinion, and they also want the member states have more control over the EU.
In all areas.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's.
Okay, so let's continue with other polling data. First of all, we found that half of Central Europeans, nearly half of Central Europeans, are dissatisfied with the Brussels-based leadership of the EU, which is very interesting because 3/4 of the Central Europeans don't want to leave the European Union, especially Hungarians. We are very supportive to the EU membership. Actually, I can tell you that in the Czech Republic, in the Czech Republic, even in the Czech Republic, 69% said that they support the EU membership. This result was the lowest in the region. So it's a very interesting situation because it shows that we have to do something. And actually, our Prime Minister addressed a speech in Tusnad. It's a small town in Transylvania. Our Prime Minister gives a speech in each summer over there. And he addressed the idea of the European Common Army, which would be very important because this idea is supported not just by the Hungarian government, but the Hungarian people. And as I told you, we conducted a V4 focused research, and we found that the majority, the vast majority of V4 citizens also support the European Common Army. Because, you know, Europe is rich, but weak in some extent, and defense policy is one of our weaknesses. On the other hand, it's also very important to address that this common army idea should be somehow part of the NATO project, because NATO membership is also very supported in Hungary, and not just in Hungary, but in the whole Central European region, except Austria, because Austria is not a NATO country. But, you know, this would lead us many open questions. Who would lead this army? We don't know much about supervision, common language, the relationship between national armed forces and this European common army, and the relationship and in the field of operations and so on. But you know, this is one very important point, because the Hungarian position is that the EU should be stronger in certain areas. Defense policy is a very important area, but I wouldn't say loosened, but should remain in this level in other areas. For example, considering migration issue.
I understand. Okay, thanks. Do you want to add anything?
Yes,
or do you?
yes,
Yeah.
definitely. I will start a bit demagogic and will say that it depends on the European common policy. So I think we are in favor of a lot of a lot of issues, but it depends on how this common European policy looks like. So that will not work where Germany say that I'm going to accept 1 million migrants and we should deal with it. That's not working. But if we can agree on how to tackle the refugee crisis and the migration crisis, I think that the Hungarian government can even support a common migration policy as well. If it's a migration policy which all the member states, or at least the majority of the member states, can agree on. But we have several other issues. Defense was one, which our Prime Minister has repeatedly highlighted, but also common energy policy could be an area which could be interesting for Hungary. Of course, we have a great dependency on Russian gas. So for us, it would be important to have a common energy policy. Border policy could be we are definitely feel threatened that migration could have an effect on the Schengen area. Of course, for Hungarians and Hungary, the movement of free people is very important. So we would like to have Schengen, and because of this, I think we could be favor of a common border policy as well. But as I said, it depends on how this common European policy is made. If it's made with the consent of the member state, or is it made with the two big countries, Germany and France? And I think Brexit, to some extent, is also a possibility. So when we are talking about the crisis aspects and about how bad is Brexit, but for example, in defense and also in the common energy policy, Brexit can be a possibility for further cooperation for the European countries, because the United Kingdom was usually reluctant to support European defense capabilities. They were really trusting on NATO and didn't think that a common European army is really an important issue. I think for most Europeans it is an important issue, and I think for Hungarians it's an important issue. So Brexit can be a possibility in this, and also in energy policy as well, because Britain was always more looking at market-oriented energy policies and not really about a common one. So I think there are a lot of areas where we can have more Europe and we can work together, and I think even the Eastern European countries are supportive of these areas. But as I said, it depends on how are these common policies debated and how are these accepted.
But this is extremely important. I would like to stress it. I mean, Hungary is usually perceived, as Poland, as many other countries, as a Eurosceptic country. Meaning,
yeah, but that's not true.
It's not. What you're telling us proves that there are some areas in which you are ready to embrace an ambitious agenda of European integration.
Yes, but we want to be at the table, so we want our opinions heard.
Of course.
And I think, as my colleagues said with the opinion poll, so Hungarians are extremely favoring the European Union, especially if you look at Western European countries, the support of the European Union is actually much higher, but not just in Hungary, in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in Slovakia. So I think we are actually pro-Europe. Of course, we have our own problems with the European Union. Sometimes we are fighting a lot of things, but overall, we are in support of the European idea and of the European project.
Thanks a lot.
In the former SEER or research conducted, we asked a very interesting
30 seconds,
question. How would you like to vote in the referendum about your country to stay or leave in the EU? With the exception of two countries, UK and the Czech Republic, every European member state would remain in the EU. If a referendum was held on the matter, we find that our home country, Hungary, is one of the most pro-European countries. Hungary stands the second place. Nearly 80% of the Hungarian citizens were for the remain. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Peter, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what should the EU do? As I mentioned, I think the EU should stick to its core business. It should not be wading into areas where it does not have enough expertise or legitimacy, and where things are bound to go wrong. Now, what does that mean in practice? One problem is indeed that even if the EU deals with trade, there's over-regulation, because the EU has, over the years, been opening up trade more and more by harmonizing rules at the Brussels level, instead of identifying the protectionist elements in national regulations. How to deal with that? Very simple. I think we should go back to a situation where we restore veto rights. So it becomes much more difficult to agree harmonized rules at the EU level. And when they are agreed, people will actually support it. And not only will this prevent over-regulation, it will also then drive the EU to go to the old system of mutual recognition of norms. So if you're a company, then you would have to take your case all the way to the European Court of Justice, which would then force a member state to open up. And this is the more difficult method, but it's the more sustainable method of opening up trade. One other example, one other advantage would be that, of course, on very sensitive policy areas, like, for example, migration quotas, you would no longer have the situation where countries are legally outvoted, like in the case of Hungary, but where everyone feels this is not fair. Indeed, like at the moment you have a situation where one country can invite people from third countries, and then the other countries are asked to deal with it. But even if absent this migration quota, I think there's a stronger case to be said that no Schengen country should just be allowed to invite any number of people from any third country. There's the logic there is actually much more stronger than to say Sweden and Germany have invited a lot of people, so now we need to spread them through other countries, to the extent that would be possible, because we have Schengen and people can go wherever they want, which is a very good thing. I want to challenge a bit the idea that you have now in Brussels that we should beef up Frontex and we should have more common border protection. Now, of course, we need strong border protection, and I'm very much in favor of migration, but I think in order for it to be sustainable, it has to happen orderly and in a legal way. If you would increase the number of border guards in Italy, for example, I'm really not so sure that this would change a lot, because I don't think the problem at the moment is that Italy lacks border guards. The problem is that when people are saved by the Red Cross or other organizations or the Italian Coast Guard, which is of course a good thing. I find it a bit unfortunate that these people are being criticized. They're doing good work, they save people in need, but then when they make it to the Italian mainland, they are allowed to travel on, which is something that does not happen in Greece. If you arrive illegally on a Greek island, you can perfectly apply for asylum, although the procedure takes way too long, but it does not mean that you can travel on. And that is the main reason why in March 2016, many people who were in Turkey have decided not to risk their lives and to make it to Greece. So that is the key change that Italy needs to implement, which is to tell people, look, you have the right to apply for asylum, but it does not mean that you can travel on. So I think this has been a very great mistake made by Italy that has also contributed to people risking their lives, and I don't see how increasing the number of border guards would change that. A second problem would be that you have then these EU border guards. Are they then under the jurisdiction of the Italian Interior Ministry? How would we deal with that? Of course, that's something that could be sorted. Now, last but not least, I think, well, an EU army. I'm a bit surprised that, especially if you're from Hungary, that you're sympathetic to that, because I think it's a very dangerous idea. First of all, as I said, the EU, it's not their thing. The EU is fundamentally an economic cooperative body. NATO is very good in defense matters. So if you would say like a European defense force within NATO, like separate from the EU institutional mechanics, I would find it more reasonable. But then even that is, I think, very dangerous when we have an American president who has said that the Baltics would not necessarily be defended. And Newt Gingrich, one of his allies, who also said that in the campaign. I think it's just very dangerous to give them, to give the Americans an excuse at some point to say, well, but you have your European army now, so you don't need our protection anymore, or military umbrella. Also, if you look now, France is not serious about this. Macron has his latest initiative is to create some defense capacity outside of the EU institutions, and I heard that, and then I'll conclude that Germany is also going to do more military purchasing without putting it out to public tender, which also goes against the idea of PESCO. I think it's a bit of a fantasy, but it's a fantasy that could be used as an excuse for the US to reduce their engagement in Europe.
Thanks a lot, Peter. The EU is fundamentally an economic cooperative body. That's where you part ways with the EPP, to be frank. We don't believe that. We believe in a political union. That's where you part ways with the EPP, but that's fine. You don't part ways with the EPP, but you have the floor.
Just a very short comment on Peter's answer, because he was speaking about the Italian situation. And I think that's why it's very important to understand the Hungarian position in the migration issue, because we are not simply anti-immigrants. We have a very specific concept how to strengthen border protection. And, you know, yeah, border protection is not enough. We want to live in a strong Europe because it would lead us to a question of a new Mediterranean policy, stabilizing the Mediterranean area, or taking part in the stabilization of the Middle East, and so on and so on. So, you know, we in Hungary have a very complex immigration policy. I agree with that. Border protection is not necessarily enough, but it's a very important element.
Okay, thanks. I think it's time to open it up. I already have 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. So I would say let's maybe start with the two gentlemen here on this row. Yes, 1, 2. Oh, okay. 3. Now I have too many, so please raise your hands in the second round, because otherwise I won't. Please.
Okay, I'm Andras László. I was born in Hungary but was raised in Belgium. I have four little remarks and one yet provocative suggestion solution. We are talking about post-Brexit future, but Brexit is not done yet. It's not sure that it will be done. Second, when you pointed out perceived as, that's a very interesting and very spot-on remark. It's an issue of communication, because Hungary and all these countries are perceived as, but is that true? Is our perception right? The third one, common European army. Europe even hasn't a common foreign minister. Mogherini is a high representative, so it's not. They haven't done yet. And to end with migration, I have a very provocative but very easy solution. And the wars in those countries, and people won't be coming here anymore. But warfare is biggest business on planet. When the American president, Mr. Trump, did his first foreign trip, he concluded a $40 billion with Saudi Arabia only for this year. So what are we talking about?
You may need an army to end a couple of wars, but that's another question. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Lasse Boom, EPP Group. I have two questions. The first one to Peter. Both are a question on the single market and on the economy. Peter, do you agree with my maths then that 28 is a higher number than 1? So if you replace 28 national regulations by 1 European regulation, in how far does this really add to additional regulation? I don't get it, but admittedly I was very bad at school in maths. And the second question is to the Hungarian members of the panel. Given the title of the panel, The Third Way, is there conceivably a third way in economic terms for the Visegrad 4 countries? I'm talking in particular about the new technologies that need to be regulated one way or the other, climate change, energy security. Can you see any possibility to have a third way in economic terms, or not at all? Thank you.
I think it's 2 people, but 4 or 5 questions. So let's have a quick round of answers. You can start, Peter, on the regulation issue, and there was, well, if you want to add on Brexit, feel free.
Sure. Well, of course, it's a good question. And, you know, many lobbyists in Brussels, they would say, look, we need European harmonization to open up markets because otherwise it's going too slow. It's never happening. Basically, we only need to get rid of the protectionist elements in national regulations. For example, it should be legal in France to say we ban glyphosate, but it should not be legal to say we ban German glyphosate. So the job of the EU should not be to prevent France from banning glyphosate if they think that's the right choice, but they should ban the protectionist elements in it. Now, I give another example. If you want to open up European borders for architects, and there's two ways of doing it. First of all, you could say, well, let's make a harmonized European regulation of how an architecture degree looks like. And of course, then you will have all the problems that you have. At first, it will be easier for people to move cross-border, but because it's sort of decided at such a central level, you will have the sort of the one-size-fits-all problem. It will be very hard to get rid of the regulation, and that's what businesses then see after they've been lobbying for harmonized regulation. They see, oh my God, now it's very hard to get rid of it. Originally, I would say before the 80s and before all this veto rights were scrapped, you had more reliance on a mutual recognition, which would mean that if you're a company, you want to export your product to somewhere else, and then the nation state or the member state in question prevents this, then you have the opportunity to go, to go through the whole court system. That's of course a slow way. The quicker way would be the European Commission, focusing on national regulations and identifying the protectionist elements in it. That's the old method. It still happens to a degree, but I think because veto powers have been scrapped, it has become way too easy to agree all kinds of harmonized European regulations.
Let's go this way.
Okay. Well, firstly, a bit about ending wars and this topic. To be honest, I think the Hungarian government's opinion about this was crystal clear from the startup. So we were thinking that to solve the migration crisis, we have to solve the conflicts in these countries. So the real solving of this crisis is not accepting tons of refugees. It's helping these countries to end the conflict and also to rebuild. And because of this, the Hungarian government actually has a program which is called Hungary Helps. And this program is aimed at persecuted Christians living in the Middle East and in Africa. So we're Christian democratic parties, so we try to show some compassion towards these persecuted people, especially because there's not too much heard about these people who are Christians and being persecuted in the Middle East or in Africa. And a bit about the V4 cooperation. I'm not really an expert on V4. To be honest, I'm a bit sometimes skeptical about the V4, but politically, I think it's a working thing. So if you look at politically, these countries are sharing a lot of the same opinions. Economically, it's more difficult because to some extent we are each other's competitors. So we have a lot of the same, our economies are basically the same. So we are sometimes competing for the same resources and the same FDI, for example. But I don't think that the V4 countries really want to have a separate economic policy from the European Union. So I think we want, in economic sense, integration. And perhaps even in the future the euro as well. I don't think that these governments are rejecting the euro. We just are still stalling a bit and trying to have better economies before joining this club. So I'm not sure. Perhaps my colleagues will be better suited to answer this V4 question, but I think now it's more of a political union, and in economic terms, I think we're more looking at in a whole European economic union and not just a V4 one. But you can disagree.
You want to add anything on the V4 question, since you have done a lot of polling around the 4 countries?
Yeah, actually, we, as I told you, we had a V4 focused polling project last year. We conducted that research last June, and we presented the data in September at the Krynica Forum. I don't know, maybe you heard about that. This is a forum of Polish economic and political elite. So, well, first of all, V4 agreement is well known in V4 countries. 8 in 10 people have heard about the V4. which is very good because, for example, the general turnout in elections in these countries are about 60%. So it's a very good number. 80% is a very good number. And the V4 agreement or V4 cooperation is very supported. And there are some expectations where should be the V4 strengthened. And we found, according to the poll, that common border protection, highway constructions, and industrial cooperation, these were those areas which were very supported by the Hungarians, Poles, Czechs, and Slovakians.
It's okay. Then we take, the lady here has disappeared, but so the gentleman here, 1, 2, 3, we can do like that.
Gilbert File. The title of this roundtable is there a third way? And by the way, my colleague behind made reference to it. None of you made any comment on this. I mean, what is the first way? What is the second way? And what is the third way? And I came here to learn about this, and I am eagerly waiting for your response. Thank you.
So the gentleman here, and then...
Good morning. My name is John Wiles, and compliments to the panel, first of all, for an extremely good and interesting discussion. I am now a Belgian whose first citizenship was British, but I have been in this town for many years, first as a journalist and then as a consultant. That background, I think, I just wanted you to know, because the explanation for Brexit is incredibly complex. Europe itself is incredibly complex. I have a firm belief that as this Brexit process goes on, your generation, you think tanks, need to understand not what caused Brexit, but what Brexit actually involves. Because there isn't, in my view, there isn't a single British politician and very few senior officials who understood the depth of, shall we say, the roots that have grown up in 45 years. That, you know, it's everything from participation in small but very important agencies to losing perhaps a position in Galileo. I mean, the implications of being a third country after you've been a member are huge. And I personally think that those of us across Europe who support integration need to use Brexit as an instrument of communication about Europe. And not least of all, need to educate your political classes about why they're in there. And my final thought, actually, which is not an original one, I wish it was, is that actually the fundamental achievement of the European Union has been to revive the nation state. It's a paradox, but it's true. Its early origins, of course, were built around losers in the Second World War, countries that were devastated, whose economies were on a recovery path and so on. The Visegrad, the Eastern Europeans, joined and rediscovered statehood and the nation state. And so my question to you all really is, where are we now and where are we going? And perhaps pivot the question around Macron and what he's talking about. Is the Macron view of Europe, namely that the bicycle must move forward, otherwise we'll all fall off, and in this case, the euro and the euro system needs, you know, needs further development. Is that going to prevail, or is that too deep now an interference in national sovereignty?
Excellent points over there. I think the lady here, but with the gentleman there first. Then 1, 2, next.
Stasinopoulos, formerly with the European Commission. We're discussing now the future of Eurozone, post-Brexit. I would like to reverse slightly the question, how Europe can avoid another Brexit in the future. And I feel in the whole discussion, we have a tendency to underestimate the importance of economic policies, European Union's economic policies, at the macro level. And there is no doubt that the malaise which exists madly in Hungary and Poland exists in other European countries. And it's the result of probably of some mistakes in the post-2007 crisis in terms of macroeconomic policy. Is there any need for some kind of to attach more importance on redistribution policies in order to reduce the malaise of the middle to low classes, which contribute somehow to create anti-immigrant, let's say, feelings because of unemployment. So that's one important factor for me, which there is a tendency to attach more importance on political issues, on the issue of, let's say, national sovereignty or national, and ignore the malaise that economic difficult conditions have created in many other European countries, not only in Poland and, let's say, in Hungary, and how to avoid, let's say, similar situations.
Okay, so that's a very full plate. So how do we start? Let's go in order. So the third way, what is the third way? Who would like to comment on this? So 1, 2, maybe? Yeah, okay.
Yes, well, I think there are three possible roads. First of all, there's the anti-EU road, get rid of the whole thing. So you have the people who are against the EU. And secondly, you have the people who are so much in favor of the EU that they're actually also against it because they want to give so much power and money to the EU that this will come into conflict with public opinion, which would revolt, and this would also endanger the project. And then I think you have the people that are really in favor of the EU and that would reform it by trying to make it more in tune with public opinion. And then, of course, in the third alternative, the opinions can differ. Some people say we should indeed have more cooperation, but only in selected areas. I would say the EU has to really scale down a lot and focus on the things where it's good at. But I think those are fundamentally the three big choices. And of course, I hope that we will go for the third road.
Yeah, we talked in the beginning about this whole white paper which was released by Juncker, and in that white paper there were 5 scenarios. So not only 3, 5. And I will add a 6th one, which is, I think, that you said that basically the breaking up of the European Union. And the first one is the carrying on scenario, which I think perhaps is this Macron scenario, where we try to just go on. We're already on the bicycle, and we're doing our best. I don't think that this is going to work because I think Brexit and all our problems are to some extent because of this, because we don't really want to change and we think that it's all good like now, but I don't think it's really working now like it should. The second one is nothing but the single market. I think the British were the most favorable with this opinion, and perhaps you, Peter, are more with this. I think this is a feasible one, but I think we achieved much more. So we shouldn't go back to just a single market, because if we only have a single market, then perhaps we don't have the Schengen area, we don't have the movement of free people, we don't have the Eurozone perhaps. So I'm not sure if this is really a good way. The third one is those who want more, do more, which is basically the two-speed Europe, which we to some extent already have. So this is a common place to say, but still we have Eurozone countries, we have countries who are not a member of the Eurozone, so we already have this kind of a two-speed Europe. I'm not sure if this is good. I think this could lead to some countries just losing out. So I don't think that's a good idea. And a fourth one is doing less more efficiently. I think the Hungarian government's opinion is this, and I think this is the third way. So recognizing those areas which we can work together, which the people are supporting as well, so the people of the member states, and focus only on those areas and be more efficient on those areas. And the fifth one was doing much more together, which is basically a big Europe, which was the first way, I think you said, no, the second way, where we have an even bigger and better and more Europe. I think, again, Brexit showed, and also the rise of Eurosceptic parties, that it would be really a wishful thinking to think that this fifth way is where the population really wants to go forward. So I think that the third way is really this doing less more efficiently way, and I think we are in favor of that as well.
Okay, there was...
The sixth one was basically the disintegration of European Union with regionalization. I think we can see some.
Juncker did not include that because he said,
it's just my opinion that it was really optimistic, all of this, even the single market one, but there's a less optimistic one, which is basically a disintegration of.
So there is.
There is a survey, and I think the survey is what people think and what people want, and. István Kis said that doing less more effectively, it is, as I say, in my view, this question, what people want, because in my view and our research indicate that this is the European citizens' choice, doing less more effectively. Of course, there are some other ways, and we have to debate about other ways too.
One small comment for me. I mean, I like polls, I like surveys, and what people think is very important. It does not exonerate elites from thinking as well. Okay, people think from time to time. Elites should think too. So when it comes to answering the concerns that people have raised, there are different ways of doing that. So it's not, we cannot just register people's will. It's our duty as political leadership to also frame and channel them in certain directions. Macron, we need to discuss Macron, because that is the elephant in the room, I think, of EU reform. I mean, this was started by the Commission, but then Macron was elected in May, and he monopolized very quickly the whole debate. He is certainly very pro-European. In this famous Sorbonne speech, he made ambitious proposals, but some of them perhaps divisive, especially for some Central European countries. So I think it's important in this panel that the Macron issue is discussed, and we can maybe ask Csaba to do it.
Actually, I really don't like this term, third way, because it reminds me to Tony Blair. But, you know, yeah, now we have this Macron idea, but the problem is that we still don't know how the Germans are thinking about this idea. And it's natural that the result will be an agreement between Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Macron. But the Hungarian position is that two-speed Europe and multi-speed Europe is not the best future for the European Union. Yeah, István also mentioned that now we live in two-speed or multi-speed Europe. Just take a look at the Eurozone, the Schengen area, or the stability mechanism. Or just to bring an economic perspective, we can speak about two-speed Europe, considering the macroeconomic numbers of northern countries and southern countries too. Central Europe, including Germany and Austria, became a growth and stability engine of the EU project. But, you know, my opinion is that, which I was speaking about during this panel discussion, that we have to identify those areas where the EU should be strengthened and those areas where national sovereignty is unquestionable. And we have to find a solution, and we have to make a deal supported by all member states.
Okay, thanks. Would you like to add anything?
I would like to add.
One moment, because we have a few more questions to address. First of all, there is the issue of the economic mistakes that gentlemen address. I know your view on the matter. You probably won't agree with the gentleman, but you may want to say something about that, and maybe on the fact that whether Brexit, do we understand what Brexit involves? But shortly, please, because.
So I'm not sure I 100% understood the whole question, but you were talking about the macroeconomic.
No, the question was basically, didn't we overlook a little bit equity redistribution? And this is one, if I understand you correctly, and this is one of the reasons why people are rebelling after the 2007. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that ties in with my idea that the euro, the common currency, maybe not so much for Britain then, but especially in mainland Europe, has supported Euroscepticism. So people have come to link two things that are in itself very different, the common currency and the EU. I would personally be very much in favor of the EU, but deeply skeptical about the common currency, because not so much because the common currency makes sure that countries can no longer or that they have to implement an internal devaluation. I think that can work. Even Greece did it to a degree. Bulgaria has its currency pegged to the euro already 20 years or so, and that works more or less okay. The main reason why I think the euro is something problematic that ultimately leads to bad social outcomes is that it simply allows countries to go into debt much more easily than would have been possible without the euro. So Hungary does not have the euro, but don't tell the Hungarian politicians, but if Hungary would join the euro, it would mean that Hungarian banks would get access to the cheap money from Frankfurt. So all that cheap money would, of course, first be invested in Hungarian government bonds, but also in the real estate market. There's nothing wrong with cheap money, of course, but there's something wrong with artificially cheap money. So a lot of investments would happen that would be unsustainable. The public spending in Hungary would become unsustainable. There would be private malinvestment, mainly in real estate, and we've seen that this can lead to very bad outcomes ultimately in Greece, but not only there. So I think, yeah, I mean, I don't have a solution for the common currency. I think it's impossible to unwind it in an orderly way. The best thing countries can do is to prepare for a scenario where interest rates go up, and Germany has to say, look, sorry, we will not destroy our savings base to save this project that is doomed anyway. And then you will have bank closures and countries, I think, going back to their national currencies, to something that they know. And I think it's best to prepare a possible scenario, and there's not much more that we can do. But indeed, in the process, it has put countries in the EU against each other, and it has created a lot of unemployment. For example, in Italy, there was no incentive for the government, for Berlusconi 10, 15 years ago, to make a lot of reforms. Why would he? Because the cheap money was flowing. The same thing happened in my own country, in Belgium. There was no incentive to reform Belgium when interest rates were so low, and the ECB was flooding Belgian banks with easy money.
Well, I should stress that this is another point on which Peter part ways with the EPP quite clearly. But you know, the incentive was not very high for Italy in the 1970s and 80s when we had an independent national bank. By the way, this is a big debate; we cannot enter into it. But you have some fair points, undeniably there. I have two ladies who wanted to speak. So one here, and the second one at the back.
Thank you for the floor. My name is Jarka Chlopkova, I'm Czech nationality, and I would actually like to draw on the points that Csaba has mentioned concerning the studies you have done in the 11 countries in Central and Eastern Europe, including Germany and Austria. To me, the results that your study shows kind of demonstrate a bipolar split in Europe concerning migration. Yeah? Now, I'm interested, what are the reasons for this bipolar split on the opinion of the public to this question? When I'm thinking about it, as me, Jarka, individual, I would say it's perhaps the colonial or post-colonial, colonial past or the post-colonial legacy. Is it something that you think it's the reason, or do you think there are more reasons for that? Did you get my question? Did you understand what I'm asking? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Katrina Wegner. I come from Germany and I represent the churches, the Protestant churches here in Brussels. I have less than a question, I have a comment. I come back to your introductory remarks when you opened this session. You said how shocked you were about Brexit and all that. I'm here since 2009 in Brussels, and I can tell you I was shocked before. I had my big shock with the crisis, and I understood that to save banks, it was necessary to take the measures probably that they were taken. But I was very much shocked how less the European Union cared for the consequences of these measures that were taken economically and socially. That was my big shock. I don't, well, coming from churches, you might understand that I come back to the question of refugees and migration. I was missing a little bit, and now it comes more and more during this discussion. If I understood you correctly from Hungary, some of you were talking about that public opinion, or even yourself, you're in favor of a renationalization of migration, of refugee issues. And could you please tell us what that would mean? What consequences would that have for the European Union, for certain countries who are at some places? Well, I'm the second woman in this room, and I'm going to say some more words. I'm sorry. So what would that mean? Is this possible? What consequences would have a renationalization? And you explained how Hungary would like to deal with the refugee problem. You said we should not accept, if I understood that correctly, migrants here on our territory, but we should solve the problems in the countries where they come from, the wars, the humanitarian crisis. So very fine, I'm hearing this argument for ages now. We haven't managed. So how are you going to do that as Hungary? So, and if you can't manage, what do you do then? That's our problem. And I guess I simply don't agree with everything that Peter said. Just one thing. You said you have to control immigration or humanitarian crisis. You can't control humanitarian crisis. People will come. So how do you react to that?
Did I say that?
Okay, you have time. Sure. You have time. 30 seconds, really. I think do you want to say something? But really, 30 seconds, no more than that, because we need to close.
Sure, just a very short comment. Well, I agree that the reason behind the differences between Western Europe and Central and Eastern Europe, behind this reason, maybe different historic background. This is one of the reasons. But on the other hand, I think it's very important to understand that after the 2008 financial crisis, Central European countries took many efforts to handle the crisis, and they managed well this crisis. So so maybe when we read news about how the mass migration affect wages in Western countries, public safety, and so on, we really don't want to face with this kind of problem, because we have our own societal and economic problems.
Thanks. Very one to Peter, and then...
I'm not sure what you were referring to that I would have said, but regarding the helping refugees in the regions of origin, I mean, I think it's widely accepted that it's much cheaper to help refugee, asylum seeker in the regions of origin than to help them over here in Western Europe. Now, I'm in favor of course, welcoming a certain number of refugees, but look, even if we would welcome 5 times as many people, according to the UN, there are 60 million refugees in the world, so there would still be many people who would have to say no to. Now, given that we have a limited budget, I mean, I think it's even a waste to say, look, we waste that budget by allowing too many people to come over here. Surely, when we can help more people by helping them over there, that would be the rational thing to do.
Okay, thanks. Very final
Just
words, and
very
then
quickly, really reflecting on this, I don't think we said that we don't accept any refugees. Of course, if people are fleeing their country, we are more than happy to accept those who are really in need. But as you said, I think the future, we should really try to focus on solving these conflicts and not just accepting everybody in Europe. So I don't think we ever said that we shouldn't accept those who are really fleeing conflicts and who are in really in a bad position. And also I think Hungary in itself will, of course, will never be able to solve these problems. That's why we would like to have a European solution, but we would like to be in this debate, and we would really like our voices to be heard. And I don't think that helps that if one country says that, okay, we're going to accept 1 million refugees, or we accept 500,000, then we should deal with it afterwards. So you should have asked us before that if we would agree with this whole thing. Sorry, just really quick.
I think my one conclusion is that after 1 hour and a half, we see the contours of a third way. And I think you are absolutely right in saying that we should reject both Eurocentralism and nationalist populism. We should agree on an ambitious agenda of European integration on some key, I call them federal areas of competence: defense, foreign policy, border control, migration, energy. You said it very well. I think this is an agenda around which the EU 27, not just France, Germany, and a few other countries, can agree. If we get more ambitious than that, if we want to intrude into national sovereignty and limit national prerogatives across the board, this will not work. This is my own conclusion on it. So thank you very much.